The structural failure of Kelly Services. Two-sided marketing, one-sided margins. Mapping the litigation landscape of online hiring, one company at a time. Hi, my name is Sarah Trumbull. I'm the founder and CEO of the Job Applicant Perspective, versus anonymous user reviews for job ads across the U.S., future of HR tech. This is going to be a bit of a long one, so I'm going to start right from the beginning from my Substack, which comes out in written format, but also in audio and video to meet people where they're at. 1946, Kelly Services beat Robert Half to the staffing market by 2 years. Robert Half weaponized exclusivity, which is really just structural indifference masquerading as prestige. Kelly Services promised humanity and connection. Yet the chasm between Kelly's aspirational promises and its lived reality is structural. Robert Half was consistently indifferent. They never claimed to care, and they didn't. Kelly's failure is far more instructive. They claimed to care loudly. They filed it with regulators publicly. They repeated it through 4 CEOs and a private equity acquisition, all while quietly building the exact same cold, closed ecosystem Robert Half ran. The faces change. The failure remains the same. Who this is for? The job seeker, especially the temporary and contract workers who trusted Kelly or are about to. This is the blueprint of a relationship designed to exploit your time. It is the explanation of why their talent promise was filed with the government regulators before it was ever engineered for you. The employer, you are the ones funding the placement fees. You deserve to see the candidate experience what the candidate experience actually looks like on the dark side of your transaction. If the process is extractive to the talent arriving at your door is already depleted. The policymaker, you are the silent underwriters of this entire model. When a staffing ecosystem creates friction, delay, and uncompensated work, your social safety net absorbs the downstream damage. This is the ledger of what that silence costs your local economy. The practitioner, for the legal and policy minds analyzing labor market structures, the chasm between what Kelly filed with the SEC and what Kelly actually built isn't just an observation. It's a roadmap. The ground rules, the same 2 structural caveats from every installment apply here. First, I am not a lawyer. I'm a structural systems theorist working from first principles of economics and publicly available data. The goal of this work is not to make legal claims. It is to make the invisible systems visible. Number 2, this is an evolving adaptive body of work. The analysis sharpens with time, critique, and incoming evidence. This is not a weakness of the methodology. It is the methodology. In adaptive systems design, precision increases with repetition. I provide falsifiable assertions specifically so this map can be tested, stressed, updated, and improved as new data evolves. Science. I like science. Testable frameworks. Falsifiable data. Improve it as you go. Don't try to be perfect. Try to be dedicated towards finding accuracy and truth. The case files. If you are new to this architecture series, get caught up on the full ecosystem here. I have the core framework linked into Layout, then Workday, then SuccessFactors, ZipRecruiter, Indeed, and Robert Half. This is the 7th installment in the series. What a real 2-sided labor market would require. The measuring stick has not changed. The goal of a marketplace, any marketplace, is to make the interaction as legible as possible for the actors so they can make an informed decision as safely as possible for their given economic circumstance or position in the transaction. This requires a certain symmetry of information flow. Info must be accessible, documentable, and support must be present when tech issues arise. Not identical tools, not identical outcomes, but symmetry in the basic infrastructure of participation. Kelly Services made this unusually straightforward. They wrote the measuring stick down and filed it with the Securities and Exchanges Commission. Quote, "We connect people to work in ways that enrich their lives," end quote. This is not a modest claim. Taken seriously, it implies exactly the standard above. It implies the people being connected to the work can see what is happening, receive support and insight as to how to address their issues, access tools that allow them to participate meaningfully to improve the market's health and outcome. We will measure Kelly using their own words. What Kelly marketed, the alignment of outcomes versus the upstream vacuum. For all the years of reviewed filings, Kelly Services said nothing about candidates beyond their utility as supply. I find that such a funny term. Employers manufacture jobs in a job market that they put as advertisement on display on vendor shelves, and employers aren't suppliers of the market. Hey, obviously you supply the market. Who else creates jobs? Everybody talks about how they create jobs. Like the 1995 10K, anyway, regardless, I digress. The 1995 10K describes the business plainly. Kelly's value proposition is that it eliminates, quote, the cost and inconvenience to the customer of hiring additional employees, including advertising, interviewing, screening, testing, and training, end quote. The value runs strictly towards the employer. Candidates are defined merely as supply to be trained and managed to match customer requirements. Again, people struggling to understand what an economic market is here. The 2002 10K repeats this language word for word. The 2016 10K summarizes Kelly's entire vision in 5 words. Quote, to provide the world's best workforce solutions, end quote. It is employer-facing, purely transactional, with no narrative aspirations for the people being placed. Like Robert Half's, it's important to give Kelly Services credit for what they actually got right. Like Robert Half, Kelly Services has an incentive structure financially that gives structural weight to placing candidates. And unlike Robert Half's close-and-done transactional placement model, Kelly's primary revenue engine is built on hourly billing. When a temporary worker is placed and remains on assignment, Kelly earns. When the assignment ends early, the billing stops. Structurally, this creates a genuine economic alignment towards sustained placements. Kelly has a direct financial reason to make sure a placement sticks. But incentivizing a sustained result is not the same as incentivizing an efficient process. A revenue model tied to active billing hours tells us the company wants placements to last. It tells us absolutely nothing about how human beings are handled on the way to that machine. The process upstream of the placement, how candidates are sourced, pooled, vetted, and cycled through uncompensated interviews, operates entirely outside the alignment that billing hours create. Because the revenue model only recognizes the act of assignment, everything preceding it is a financial vacuum. The candidate's time, preparation, and anxiety are treated as free inputs for the firm. There is zero structural incentive to make the onboarding process efficient and zero structural cost when it drags. Inefficiency is only a loss if the party carrying the friction can exit the market. In a closed ecosystem where candidates must accept the fog to find work, Kelly can profit from a process sprawl with total ease. The rhetorical pivot, 2017 to 2020. In 2017, something changed, not in the architecture of the product, but in the language filed with the state. The 2017 10K opens its history and development section with a brand new sentence, quote, founded by William R. Kelly in 1946, Kelly's service pioneered an industry that connects people with work in ways that enrich their lives, end quote. This was a retroactive reframing of history. The 1995, 2002, and 2016 filing contained no such mission. In 2017, enriching lives was retroactively applied to 1946 as though it had always been the point. In the 2018 10K, this language was elevated to a strategic pillar in the MD&A, officially christened the Noble Purpose. Kelly told Wall Street this purpose underpinned the entire strategic direction of the company. Yet in August 2019, Kelly's own outgoing CEO, George Corona, admitted to investors on an earnings call they hadn't actually built it yet. He described a program called Talent X, infrastructure designed to finally understand what talent was doing and made changes in service delivery. He framed candidate care as future competitive advantage Kelly had not yet achieved. The aspiration was filed with regulators in 2018. The architecture was non-existent in 2019. Then in 2020, the language magically became operational. The 2020 10K introduced the talent promise, claiming they were, quote, reallocating resources to be solely focused on the temporary worker experience, end quote. Alongside Equity at Work, a platform marketed to, quote, break down systemic barriers to employment, end quote. Both were filed as present tense active commitments, yet neither filing described a single metric, feedback mechanism, support pathway, or user interface for the job seeker. Nothing was built between the CEO's August 2019 acknowledgement that the infrastructure didn't exist and the 2020 filing claiming it did. What changed was the filing, not the machine. The record this year, 2026, 9 years after the language changed, the noble purpose is still being zombie walked through the regulatory updates. At the May 2026 annual shareholder meeting, the incoming CEO invoked it yet again. Connect people to work in ways that enrich their lives, end quote. The noble purpose has survived 4 CEOs, a controlling shareholder sale, multiple corporate restructurings, and $174 million in goodwill impairments. It survives because it costs $0 to file and requires $0 to maintain. It has never been attached to a single candidate-facing metric or feedback mechanism in any public document Kelly has ever filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission. The falsifiable assertion is simple. Show us the candidate-facing infrastructure that would make the noble purpose real across 9 years that has appeared in Kelly's public filings. The public record related to that gap follows. The architecture of a closed ecosystem. Kelly Services, like Robert Half, is not a job board. It is not an ATS. To understand its failure modes, you must first understand what makes the staffing model structurally distinct and why that distinction matters for everyone inside it. In the ATS and job board model, the failure is loud. It spills outward. Candidates spray applications into aggregators, employers receive noise at scale, and the market absorbs the signal degradation in real time. The exhaust of the filter lands somewhere visible. The harm, however diffuse, is legible to the market. Staffing operates differently. The ecosystem is closed. Candidates don't apply to the open market. They enter a recruiter-mediated relationship. What happens inside stays inside. When a candidate is processed but not placed, they don't generate noise for the rest of the market. They don't produce a signal the employer can read. They disengage or they re-enter, generating another interaction, another uncompensated cycle, another preparation investment, none of which produces anything the market can learn from. The harm doesn't spill outward, it collapses inward. It's sucked upward. This is the structural condition that makes every failure mode below possible. Not software, not an algorithm, a closed door. The candidate's experience, whatever it was, stays inside the ecosystem when they leave. The next candidate enters without the data to make an informed choice about whether this hiring ride, end quote, is even a taxi they want to enter. They often only have a sense that the destination at the end might be fun to get to. The employer purchases the outcome without ever seeing the process that produced it. In a functioning market, bad experiences generate signals. Signals generate corrections. Corrections protect the next participant. Signals inform the paying customer. In a closed ecosystem, especially one that structurally neglects to build the user experience at all, the signal dies with the experience. The correction never comes. The next participant enters blind. Everything that follows should be read inside that frame. The 3 failure modes of information asymmetry. The following 3 failure modes, like Robert Half, represent the systemic stripping of consumer protection. The bait, what you were told you were entering. The breakdown, what happened when the process failed. The silence, the structural inability to make your experience legible enough for other participants to make an informed choice. Make a more informed choice. All 3, taken together as a whole, replicate the information asymmetry as a service profit model we have seen in previous installments. The age of the company demonstrates that while this profit model was given steroids and scale with the internet, it has existed amongst older talent vendors since at least when we document. Failure mode 1, white labeling. Debate. In previous installments of this series, white labeling referred to a single direction of concealment, the vendor backgrounding themselves under the employer's label, or foregrounding themselves but withholding information about the product taxonomy. Kelly Services operates this failure mode in two directions simultaneously. One is documentable from the public record. The other is structural and requires us to be precise about what we can or cannot demonstrate. What we can document. Kelly hides itself under employer brands. Kelly's OCG segment, Outsourcing and Consulting Group, delivers what the filings describe as, quote, end-to-end talent acquisition solutions under client brands, end quote. The 2018 10K describes RPO as, quote, offering end-to-end talent acquisition solutions, including customized recruitment projects, end quote. The 2020 10K repeats it. The 2025 10K repeats it yet again. End-to-end talent acquisition delivered under a client brand means exactly what it says. A candidate applying to what appears to be an employer's hiring process may be inside Kelly's infrastructure, Kelly's screening, Kelly's filtering, Kelly's candidate management systems without knowing Kelly is involved at all. This is the ATS white labeling model applied to staffing. The difference is that ATS companies like Taleo and Workday are infrastructure tools. Kelly is an active participant in the hiring decision. Kelly is screening, evaluating, and managing the candidate pipeline and doing it under someone else's name. The candidate has no documented way to know this is happening. No disclosure requirement appears anywhere in Kelly's public filings. No notification mechanism is described. Analytically, it represents distributed irresponsibility running in three directions simultaneously. I'm like 3 XYZ graph. First, employer hires Kelly Services to handle its hiring and thus offloads the responsibility of the work. Second, Kelly Services white labels itself under the employer's name, thus offloading the social accountability candidates will deliver for a hiring experience performed badly. Third, public failure to meet staffing needs are offloaded onto the job-seeking workforce that everyone required for the transaction to exist at all, but each felt entitled to avoid accountability for meeting the needs of. The OCG segment generated hundreds of millions in revenue annually, delivering this service to some of the world's largest employers. The candidate absorbed the cost of a process they could not see, could not evaluate, and could not attribute accurately, even if they wanted to. The second aspect of this failure mode requires a different standard of argument because we're working from architecture rather than a directed mission. We will clearly say what we can prove and what we cannot. Here is what Kelly Services' business model structurally requires Kelly to know. Which roles are genuinely open versus perpetually listed to build candidate pipelines? What employers actually pay versus what appears in job postings? How long placements typically last at specific employers? Which clients are converting temporary workers to permanent and which are not? Where supply gaps exist in specific markets and skill categories? How deep the candidate pipeline is for a given role at a given moment. Kelly Services sells this knowledge to employers as product feature. In August 2019, George Corona described to investors the competitive advantage Kelly was building, understanding supply and demand dynamics in specific markets, knowing which customers were changing their workforce strategies, deploying recruiting capacity towards demand before competitors could. The intelligence is the product Kelly sells to the employer's side of the transaction. Candidates have access to none of it. A candidate deciding whether to invest time in a Kelly application process, whether to take a day off work for an interview, whether to hold availability for an assignment that may never materialize, whether a posted role reflects a genuine opening or an evergreen listing, is making the decision without the information Kelly holds. Kelly holds asymmetric information about employer behavior and sells that asymmetry to employers. The candidate, who is the other side of the transaction Kelly claims to serve, is making decisions in the dark. We do not have direct quote of Kelly executives saying, here is what we know and what we don't tell candidates. We looked. It's not in the earnings call transcripts we reviewed. What we have is the architecture, a business model that requires Kelly to hold this information, a revenue model that incentivizes selling it to employers, and no documented mechanism for sharing it with candidates. In Akerloft's lemon market, the seller knows the car is a lemon, the buyer doesn't. The information asymmetry isn't incidental to the market failure. It is the market failure. Kelly's OCG and staffing model creates the same condition. One party to the transaction holds material information, the other needs to participate meaningfully, and there is no structural incentive to share it. The absence of that disclosure infrastructure is what we can document. Across the 2014, 2018, 2020, and 2025 10Ks reviewed for this analysis, no candidate-facing information disclosure mechanism appears anywhere. The measuring stick has not changed. A functioning two-sided market requires both sides to see what is happening. One side here cannot. The architecture is the argument. The structure speaks. Failure mode 2, no tech support infrastructure for candidates. In the ATS installment of this series, the absence of candidate-facing tech support was embedded in the product architecture, systems designed for employer efficiency that candidates pass through without recourse. In staffing, the same absence takes different form. It isn't hidden in software logic. It's visible in the risk disclosures of the annual SEC filings, repeated across years in language that never changes. The boilerplate. The 2014 10K lists among its information technology disclosures, quote, improvements to applicant onboarding and tracking systems, order management, and improvements to financial processes such as billing and accounts payable through system consolidation and upgrades, end quote. The 2018 10K lists, quote, improvements to applicant onboarding and tracking systems, order management, and improvements to financial processes such as billing and accounts payable through system consolidation and upgrades, end quote. The 2020 10K lists, quote, improvements to applicant onboarding and tracking systems, order management, and improvements to financial processes such as billing and accounts payable through system consolidation and upgrades, end quote. The sentence is identical across every filing reviewed between 2014 and 2020, word for word. Two things are true about that sentence. First, it confirms that Kelly's applicant onboarding and tracking systems were an acknowledged area of ongoing improvement, meaning they were not complete, not stable, and not optimized across the entire period the noble purpose and talent promise were being filed. Second, it frames every one of those improvements as an internal efficiency initiative. The sentence lives in the risk disclosure section alongside billing systems and financial process upgrades. It is not in a section about candidate experience. It is not described as candidate-facing investment. It is described as something that, if it fails to yield intended results, could, quote, adversely affect operations, liquidity, and financial condition. Employer-facing infrastructure lives in the business section and MD&A, described as product features Kelly delivers to clients. Candidate-facing technology lives in risk factors, described as operational risk to Kelly's own business. One belongs to strategy and product success. The other belongs to liability management. Candidate well-being, consideration, and care were never part of what made the product a success as described to investors. Keep in mind, a vendor's job isn't to deliver jobs to job seekers. It's to deliver a respectful, informed process in order to be a viable platform through which roles can be found. The architecture of Kelly's filings said the quiet part out loud, not in words, but in what wasn't said, what wasn't measured, and where things were placed. The gap between the process consideration employers received and the process consideration delivered to candidates, the inefficiency and the profits it would entail, the lack of FAQ, the lack of tech support. This was not an oversight. It was also what was being demonstrated to investors as the source of the product's profitability. The fact that they didn't have to do their jobs in a two-sided market was what was being sold, openly described. Information asymmetry as a service is profitable because it means you can profit by not doing things. Openly, actively filed. What Talent X was. In August 2019, George Corona described the Talent X program to investors as being designed to explicitly to both understand what the talent is doing and then make changes in our service delivery process, end quote. Understanding supply behavior is an employer side product. It speaks of job seekers the way a fishery speaks of fish. Where are they? How many are there? Which waters are running deep this season? That intelligence tells Kelly where to cast its net, which markets have supply gaps, where recruiting capacity could be deployed. It is useful to Kelly's business and to Kelly's employer clients. A fish is not a stakeholder in the fishery. It is the resource the fishery exists to harvest. Again, they said Talent X was designed to explicitly to both understand what the talent is doing and then make changes in our service delivery process. It's like fish in the fishery, a fishery describing the fish. A fish is not a stakeholder to the fishery. It is the resource the fishery exists to harvest. We will make the reasonable defense here. Corona may have genuinely believed that understanding where talent was and how to reach it more efficiently would ultimately serve candidates by connecting them to opportunities faster. That's a defensible reading of its intent. But intent does not produce infrastructure. The public record shows what followed. Let's take the statement at face value and ask the reasonable question. If Talent X were candidate support infrastructure, what would we expect to find in the public record that followed? We would expect to find in the subsequent public record at least one of the following: a candidate-facing FAQ system, a status visibility tool, an issue escalation pathway, a response time standard, a satisfaction metric, a feedback mechanism, a support channel description. None of these appeared in any filing in any year following Corona's August 2019 description. What does appear in 2020 and again unchanged in 2025, buried in the risk factors section, where Kelly discloses to investors what could go wrong with its technology investments? Quote, improvements to applicant onboarding and tracking systems, order management, improvements to financial processes such as billing and accounts payable through system consolidation and upgrades. End quote. That sentence is Kelly's documented description of what its technology programs actually produced. Internal, efficiency-facing, unchanged from 2014. We will not claim to know precisely what Talent X was designed to do beyond what Corona said publicly. What we can document is what it did not produce. If it was candidate support infrastructure, the subsequent public record showed zero change in candidate support infrastructure. Corona names Talent X in the same breath as, quote, the care we take with their careers, end quote. The public record shows what that care produced. The same nothing it was in 2014 before anyone said the words noble purpose out loud. What the talent promise said and what followed. The 2020 10K introduced the talent promise, quote, reallocating resources to be solely focused in the temporary worker experience, end quote, as a present tense operational commitment. If the resources had been reallocated solely to the temporary work experience, the filing would be documentable in subsequent filings, candidate-facing support infrastructure, feedback mechanisms, escalation pathways, response time standards, satisfaction metrics. The 2025 10K contains none of these. The identical boilerplate about applicant onboarding and tracking systems, framed as an internal efficiency risk, appears again. The talent promise was filed in 2020. 5 years later, the only documented technology investment touching candidates remains an internal efficiency line item in the risk disclosure section, unchanged in language from 2014. The structural observation: a company with no financial incentive to make the candidate experience efficient will not build the infrastructure that efficiency requires. Candidate tech support, FAQ systems, status visibility, issue resolution pathways, escalation mechanisms cost money to build and maintain. It produces no billing hours. It generates no placement fees. It appears nowhere on the revenue statement. Kelly's incentive structure has no line item for candidate support. The talent promise named the obligation. The architecture ignored it. The boilerplate proves the timeline. The falsifiable assertion is the same one we have made in every installment of this series. Show us the candidate-facing support infrastructure. The public record shows it was never built. 6 years of identical language in the risk disclosure is not a coincidence. It is the record. Failure mode 3, no job seeker user experience. All functioning markets are constrained by some combination of financial and social capital, essentially money and reputation. How much something costs and what the experience is likely to be in interacting and completing the transaction. These governance mechanisms operate across every axis of the market simultaneously. While not all actors in the market impact its function via financial capital, all market interactions require a baseline of social capital to exist at all. You give something they can predict. Social capital means they're predictable. You can make a predictable choice. When you don't have social capital, you have no predictability, Regardless of how much money a buyer has, a bad reputation for paying debts or abusing a market's safety and a vendor's well-being will cut short any market interaction. Regardless of how magnificent the car is, a low star rating will quickly crush an Uber driver's ability to find work. Regardless of how beautiful the product, a toxic reputation around blood diamonds actively halts sales within specific demographics. Regardless of how exotic the goods or services available for purchase, the quote dark web operates with significantly less business precisely because it exists minus reputational mechanisms to guarantee user safety. The list goes on. These are the accountability mechanisms that tell a marketplace whether it is meeting the needs of the people inside it and that warn other participants what to expect before they enter. In a two-sided market where the payer isn't hungry, aka buying a product or service for themselves, but instead they're generous, aka buying it for someone else, user experience is paramount. Paramount. Disney doesn't have to ask user experience because parents got to go home with their kids, But in a job market, lack of user experience is almost rent-seeking by definition. There's no possible way for them to do anything but rent-seek when they're not required to meet the user needs that drive their profits. Not only does a public user experience layer inform the marketplace and its vendors of user needs, it informs the paying customer about whether or not the products they are purchasing are being delivered as promised. Crucially, it allows other market users to make more informed choices so they can protect themselves as needed. Governance mechanisms are what keep buyers and sellers honorable and platforms neutral. Accountability doesn't end something. It connects something. Lack of accountability is the ending of things, not accountability. Like all actors in the series, Kelly Services' complete lack of user experience for half its stakeholders and well over 98% of its actual users tells a very clear structural tale of what they were actually selling. An unassailable truth of economic systems. If job seekers were a stakeholder that Kelly Services was hired to serve, user experience would exist. How else does a talent vendor demonstrate they delivered the goods and services they claim to provide in the purchase agreement to the paying customer? By definition, they're not stakeholders when there's no user experience. It's not possible. But if talent were a product employers were efficiently purchasing, user experience would also exist. How else does a vendor demonstrate they're delivering a product efficiently, if not by instrumenting the line of its experience for friction points to ease? That means two things. Job seekers aren't a labor market stakeholder Kelly Services feels required to meet the needs of. And talent is not a product Kelly Services is structurally promising to deliver efficiently. But their presence is required for all the profits. Sounds like unpaid labor to me. I previously argued in this series that this means talent isn't the product and job seekers are unpaid workforce, and that ease is what's actually being sold. And that remains true at the output layer. What this installment clarifies is the mechanism underneath that. The absence of user experience doesn't prove talent isn't the product. It proves that delivering it with care or efficiency was the opposite of what the system was promising to do. By structural definition, the employer purchased the perception. The candidate absorbed the cost of its absence. The gap between what the market promised to deliver and what the structure promised to deliver was the uncompensated cost the workforce was structurally assigned to carry the moment the labor market moved online and stripped both governance mechanisms simultaneously, which produces the falsifiable assertion that unifies every installment of the series. Show us a talent vendor whose revenue model is structurally damaged by candidate inefficiency. If you cannot find one, the inefficiency is the model. That's what the model is. The structural verdict: the lack of job seeker user experience is not a design oversight. It is the condition that makes the online hiring profit model possible. You cannot profit via failing 98% of your users if user experience exists. You only get to do that when it doesn't. Corporate ease requires distance. Distance requires total silence. Silence requires that the person trapped inside the machinery has no platform to speak from, no system engineer to listen, and no witness willing to look. The level of unimpressed I am, the institutional betrayal, 20 years of betraying every citizen of this country, everyone who looked for work. And the people in charge looked the other way instead of doing their jobs. They failed an open book test with all the data right in front of them because the one thing they could not do was be chefs concerned with the experience of eating at the restaurants. The act of being concerned with the experience of eating at the restaurant made them feel like they weren't chefs anymore. They had to ignore it. They had to invalidate the experience of eating there in order to feel like themselves. This is economic stupidity at its finest. It's cultural norm. It's not economically intelligent at all. It's a great way to collapse an economic market that the entire economy relies on. Kelly filed the noble purpose 9 times, not because it was a design blueprint, but because it made the silence comfortable enough that no one asked what it cost. The candidates were the raw fuel, the corporate ease was the output. The crushing silence in between was never an accident. It was the architecture. Recruiting firms meet ATS architecture. This is where Kelly Services gets architecturally interesting. Again, I love this stuff. I think it's fascinating the way the webs of the patterns interact together. In case, this is where they get architecturally interesting. While Robert Half mirrors the first 3 layers of their failure modes, structurally, Kelly Service also incorporates architecture from job boards in the ATS industry. But just like Robert Half, and unlike the ATS industry, the cyclone of delays this behavior creates stays contained and impacts candidates as an extra extraction mechanism and not an outcome that sprays the market. Let's dive in. How you ransom seek the workforce in order to rent seek employers. Ransom seeking hundreds of millions of people with unpaid labor. The level to which I'm unimpressed here. Failure mode 4, filtering versus matching. Okay, I would like to clarify my issue with how filtering functions in the online hiring market. A filter is not inherently a problem in a marketplace. Every market filters. The question that determines whether a filter serves the market or extracts from it is deceptively simple. Who is the filter for? Who is it for? Where is it pointed? What is it doing? A filter built for the person choosing between wares makes the market more legible. It clarifies the layout and organizes the data so the chooser can make a more informed decision with less wasted time. You're talking about more informed decision, not a less one, a more informed. That filter serves the transaction. It puts a pattern to the data. It doesn't erase the data. It puts a pattern to it. It produces signal. It generates matches that hold because both parties had enough information to choose well. A filter built for the person displaying the wares makes the market more ignorable. It processes the supply so the displayer never has to look at it directly. The filter serves the vendor. It produces noise that stays contained inside the ecosystem, cycling, accumulating, going nowhere, because the person being filtered has no surface to generate signal from, and the person doing the filtering has no incentive to care what the filtering costs. A clarifying filter, where it clarifies the information, the pattern of the information, or a curating filter, where it just erases 95% of the information, top 5%. Using an algorithm that absolutely is incentivized to erase good data because that makes them engage again. And that gets them more profit. Like, how is this just the incentive alignment? It's all wrong. They're profiting from failing. The first kind produces efficient hiring and markets that clear. The second produces the previously described Nash non-converging equilibrium. Employers optimize for filtering, job seekers optimize for visibility. So employers double down on filtering, so job seekers double down on visibility. Rinse, wash, repeat. The market never clears, it just churns. It's Nike. It's the Foot Locker filtered Nike's customers, and they needed to have shoes to survive. In a closed ecosystem, that churning stays invisible. That noise doesn't spray outward the way a job board application inflation does. It collapses inward. Candidates cycle through unplaced, absorbing the cost, generating no signal the next candidate can read or the employer can learn from. The closed door is what makes the non-converging sustainable indefinitely. If such a marketplace had revenue models built around sustained but unacknowledged inefficiency, vendors would be likely to encourage sellers of their wares to filter their shoppers. If Foot Locker could convince Nike that it should filter its customers, it surely would too. As long as the customers had to have shoes in order to eat, you know? There's a reason I call this grocery stores that profit via hiding the food. This is exactly what it is. Kelly's public record answers the filter question consistently across every filing reviewed. The language Kelly uses to sell itself to employers, the 2014 10K, described the competitive factors in Kelly's industry. Quality of service is highly dependent on the availability of qualified, competent talent and her ability to recruit, screen, train, retain, and manage a pool of employees. Also match the skills required by particular customers. 2017 10K repeats it identically. 2018 10K repeats it identically. Read that sentence carefully. The word match appears, but it is doing unilateral work. It describes Kelly's ability to produce candidates who fit what employers require. It says nothing about whether that role fits what the candidate requires. It describes one direction of optimization, employer towards supply, not bilateral process in which both parties are evaluated for fit. The pool serves the employer. The candidate serves the pool. This is a vendor-side filter for shoppers for convenience, not a market-side match. You can't tell the difference between employer comfort and market matching, market outcomes. Like, of course, they can just hose employers how important they are and how candidates just don't appreciate you enough. Like, when insulting candidates is more profitable than solving hiring, like, they're just going to insult candidates and call it talent shortages. That's what anybody would do when you don't have market discipline. There's no reason to solve the market. Just collapse it for profit. How Corona described the candidate in 2019. In August 2018, George Corona told investors and Kelly was restructuring U.S. branch operations to address supply and demand fluctuations, removing barriers so that productive capacity in the Midwest could be redeployed to meet demand in California. Candidates are the productive capacity in that sentence. They are freight. The framing is logistics. Where is the supply? Where is the demand? And how efficiently can one be moved towards the other? Genuinely, I really don't think they know what a two-sided market is, period. Like, they don't know. Wild disconnection from reality. Just such a structural delusion these people are in. A matching process asks whether this candidate and this role are right for each other. A logistics process asks whether this supply unit can fill this demand gap. Corona was describing the second thing openly to investors as competitive advantage. Yeah, he said they were restructuring U.S. branch operations to address supply and demand fluctuations, removing barriers so that productive capacity in the Midwest could be redeployed to meet demand in California. Yeah. A matching process asks whether the candidate and this role are right for each other. A logistics process asks whether this supply unit can fill this demand gap. Corona was describing the second thing openly to investors as a competitive advantage, as if that's not admitting you're collapsing a market. It is an honest description. It is not a description of a two-sided market. It's a description of how you collapse one. What was never measured across every filing reviewed, no metric appears to ask whether candidates found the roles that enrich their lives, no placement satisfaction metric, no candidate outcome tracking, no measurement of whether temporary assignments led to stable employment, no feedback loop of any kind. Engines with only positive feedback loops? What causes this lack of thinking? Kelly measures conversion rates, gross profit rates, days sales outstanding, customer retention, every metric that tells where the employer side, whether it's being served. Nothing measures where the candidate side is. That's how you run an engagement trap for profit. You have two sides, but you only measure one and you totally script the other. Then it can be, oh, I have no idea where this engagement problem came from. Yeah, I'm sure you don't. Happens in the dark side of the moon that you definitely decide not to instrument on purpose. In a genuine two-sided market, both sides generate signal. The signal tells a platform whether it's serving value or extracting it. The absence of candidate side metrics is not a reporting gap. It is a structural confirmation that candidate outcomes were the variable being profitably unoptimized. There is only one reason you do not instrument half your market and well over 98% of your users. It's because not instrumenting them is profitable. Not optimizing their experience is profitable. The filter was built for the person displaying the wares. The public record proves it across 11 years. The closed ecosystem guaranteed that the choice stayed invisible to everyone except the candidates absorbing it. Telling the cost, the failure modes documented above do not stay inside Kelly's ecosystem. They externalize the cost of a closed system that filters instead of matches, that holds information candidates need, that built no support infrastructure and no feedback mechanism. That lands somewhere. It lands on three parties who had no hand in designing the system and no voice in how it operated. First, job seekers, the uncompensated cycle. The figures below speak to magnitude, not precision. They are derived from Kelly's public filings and external sources were indicated. Scaling factor. Kelly's SEC filings report temporary worker placement volumes directly. The 2018 10K reports approximately 500,000 temporary employees signed globally. 2017 10K reports nearly 500,000. The 1985 10K reports 655,000. According to the U.S. domestic placement volume and adjusting for Kelly's documented international operations, a conservative estimate of U.S. placements across the documented period runs approximately 370 to 375,000 workers annually. This corresponds exactly with the 2025 10K. These are the candidates who were placed. They're the floor. Candidate pool. To capture the full population paying the ghost hour tax, we apply the same industry standard interview to placement ratios used in the Robert Half installment, 10-1 or 20-1, to the placement floor. Again, these are guesstimates because these are standards, but we don't have Kelly's numbers. We're just using industry standards. This accounts for the candidates who cycled through Kelly's process and were not placed. At the 10-1 floor, Kelly processed approximately 3.7 million U.S. candidates annually. At the 20-1 ceiling, Kelly processed approximately 7.4 million U.S. candidates cycles annually. The time burden. Each candidate cycles carries uncompensated time costs, application, preparation, screening calls, interview attendance, availability holding, follow-up, waiting. The Robert Half installment used a conservative floor of 5 uncompensated hours per cycle. While we acknowledge that Kelly Services no doubt has its own interview cycles, to have a grounded conservative floor, we move from the Gentry lawsuit number and apply the same thinking here. Again, it's a standardized number from a lawsuit. So we're starting there. We recognize, again, these are magnitude, not precision. The dollar calculation, time burden floor, 5 uncompensated hours per candidate cycle. Baseline wage, $22 per hour. BL's median wage weighted for Kelly's documented specialties, including science, engineering, technology, education, and light industrial. Opportunity cost multiplier, 1.5 to 2 times scaling for the Chodorow-Reich and Karakabunis opportunity cost framework. Apologies if that is your name and I butchered it. And capturing the true economic value of lost search time beyond the direct wage equivalent. The financial matrix, raw time loss annual. 10-1 floor, 18.5 million hours extracted annually. 20-1 ceiling, 37 million hours extracted annually. Step 2 direct costs at $22 an hour. At the 10-1 floor, 407 million in uncompensated labor annually. At the 20-1 ceiling, 814 million in uncompensated labor annually. True economic cost of the Chodorow-Reich multiplier. The 10-1 floor, 611 million to 814 million annually. At the 20-1 ceiling, 1.22 billion to 1.63 billion annually. These figures speak to annual magnitude across the documented period. They do not speak to precision. They speak to the structural condition. Uncompensated candidate time is extracted by a closed ecosystem, converted into the ease Kelly sells to employers, and never appears on a balance sheet. Small businesses benchmarking blindness. Kelly's failure mode for small businesses is not noise. It is information. The closed ecosystem doesn't flood small business market with spam applications the way job boards do. its impact is more quiet and more distorting. Kelly's RPO and MSP products deliver something large enterprise customers that small businesses cannot access: proprietary intelligence about the labor market. Which skill categories have supply gaps? What compensation levels are actually required to close positions in specific geographies? What conversion rates look like across different employer types? How long placements hold? Large enterprise customers who contract with Kelly's OCG segment get that intelligence built into the service. It informs how they structure their workforce, how they post, how they price roles, how they compete for talent. Small businesses, the pizza shop, the healthcare clinic, the regional accounting firm, operate entirely outside the information loop. They see the outputs of a market Kelly has shaped without the access to the data Kelly used to shape it, as well as the depleted, cynical candidates it leaves in its wake. Output A, the contaminated candidate. Candidates arrive at the small business after cycling through Kelly's closed ecosystem, screened against employer requirements, processed through an opaque pipeline, given no feedback when rejected, given no visibility into their status. The small business inherits a candidate shaped by a process the small business knows nothing about. They are more likely to slack off, quit without notice, and accept roles they don't mean to stay in because they're desperate. I would ballpark that the vast majority of the workforce has CPTSD from this online hiring market. It's straight emotional neglect, straight institutional neglect. If institutions are authorities or parent-style figures, it's straight neglect, straight institutional distrust of anyone who comes across as an authority, because authority has been demonstrably nothing but untrustworthy, never there to protect the interests of the people, always there to harm them whenever they're already being harmed. That's what they do in the labor market. Every time you try to get a job seeker to adapt more towards the market, you're just doubling down on the harm they're experiencing. Because the most important thing is you don't try to get the market to adapt to the job seeker. Don't enforce accountability for the job seeker. As soon as we don't enforce accountability, we're just doubling down on harm. It's institutional betrayal. Capture. Output B, the perception gap. Large enterprises, it's not right that they should quit small businesses, but also that's what happens when you traumatize an entire population at scale. You gaslight people at scale. The perception gaps. Large enterprise customers appear to move through talent acquisition with ease. What is invisible to the small business is that this ease is purchased by outsourcing the friction to Kelly's closed ecosystem, externalizing the candidate experience costs, and buying access to market intelligence the small business cannot afford. The small business concludes, the workforce is unreliable. The market is broken. Candidates are difficult. The structural cause remains invisible because the ecosystem that produced it emits no signal the small business can read. Again, lack of feedback. For me, it's kind of like when someone says they left out of nowhere, they got upset out of nowhere. I almost think it's an admission of guilt. If you were in a relationship with someone, you had no idea that something was wrong. You did something wrong in the relationship. Obviously, you weren't paying attention. Obviously, you caused harm that you felt comfortable ignoring, municipalities, the downstream carry. The friction Kelly's closed ecosystem generates does not stay with the candidate to absorb it. It transfers, the transference chain. Kelly's closed ecosystem extracts uncompensated candidate time. Candidates who cycle through without placement absorb extended periods of wage instability. The instability converts directly into demand on the public infrastructure. Direct fiscal strains increase utilization of food assistance, housing support, and municipal social services by workers cycling through temporary assignments without income stability. Administrative burden, heightened processing volume at state unemployment insurance programs and local workforce development boards serving temporary workers between placements. Revenue destruction, deferred and diminished local tax contributions from workers in extended search cycles, earning below capacity or exiting the market entirely. The Oakland's Law projection, a staffing ecosystem that filters instead of matches, produces structural unemployment. Candidates who could be placed are not placed, not because they lack qualifications, but because the system was designed to serve employer requirements, not to optimize bilateral outcomes. Employers are the suppliers of the market. They're not its customers. They're its primary suppliers and its secondary customers. As soon as you confuse them as not the primary suppliers and the secondary customers, job seekers are the primary customers and the secondary suppliers. It's a two-stage process. Like, first, job seekers come to the market to acquire roles. Second, they supply talent because they've already chosen the roles. They've already signed up to supply the talent. But it only happens because employers are the primary suppliers until you can treat them as job advertisements on display, as the things to be filtered, not the customers to be filtered. Like, until we filter the inventory instead of the customers, it's just market collapse. That's all it is. Like, Okun's candidates who are placed are sometimes placed in roles that do not hold, returning them to the search cycle. Okun's law defines structural relationship between unemployment and economic output. Every 0.1% increase in structural unemployment driven by systemic search friction and market opacity represents approximately $56 billion in foregone annual GDP. Kelly's closed ecosystem contributes to that friction by preventing market signals from reaching either side of the market. Candidates cannot warn each other. Employers cannot see what the process costs the people moving through it. Municipalities cannot see the cause of the downstream demand they are absorbing. A market that cannot see its own friction cannot correct it. The cost accumulates invisibly and lands on the institutions least equipped to absorb it. The policy bottom line: municipalities and local workforce boards are subsidizing the downstream consequences of the design choices they had no hand in making. Kelly placed an estimated 370,000 to 375,000 workers annually while fulfilling the noble purpose. The temporary workers who generated that revenue had no voice in how the process was designed, no feedback mechanism when it failed them, and no documented pathway to the support Kelly claimed to have built. The ghost hour tax is what that condition cost. The public record shows who paid it. Check the research. The failure modes described in this analysis are not novel observations. They reflect foundational work in market structure, platform design, and user infrastructure. Again, George Akerloff's market for lemons. Information asymmetry is a bad thing, not a good thing. I just don't understand how, talent vendors, what causes them to be confused about this. You're just that wrong. You just caused that much harm. That's what you did. Information asymmetry is a service. Full stop. Nash, non-cooperative games. Game theory knows it. As soon as they started insulting job seekers as not wanting to work, it's why would you admit to that? Only vendors. As soon as Disney starts accusing children of not liking fun anymore, we also know Disney is full of crap too. Roche and Turul's platform competition in two-sided markets. Yeah. Nielsen, usability engineering, Morgan and Kaufman, human-centered design, ACM code of ethics, a couple of my own, job market for lemons, and category are in the talent acquisition industry. SEC filings from 10Ks from 1995, 2002, 2016, 2014, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2020, 2025. Also, their Q2 2019 earnings call transcript from August 2019, Q4 2021 earnings call, transcript from February 2022, Q3 2023 earnings call from November 2023, and Q1 2026 shareholder meeting and earnings presentation. A note in the job applicant perspective. TJOB is the company producing this series, the job applicant perspective strategy, starting from the other side. TJOB is what happens when you start from the opposite direction. We didn't build a better way to purchase talent. We built a marketplace for the function of hiring, a bilaterally governed, disciplined virtual ground for an efficient employment solution to occur on. Finally, a neutral marketplace for the first time in 25 years. We have gone 2 decades at least without a functioning labor market, with a market without any discipline. The economic harm is off the charts. Employers post what they need. Job seekers rate what they experience. The signal flows back to the market as public information. The technology is not novel. Amazon did this for products. Uber did it for rides. Airbnb did it for rentals. The only thing missing was the will to build it for the person trying to feed their family. Kelly's information architecture, the asymmetry between what Kelly knows about employers and what candidates are permitted to see, is only sustainable inside a closed ecosystem. It depends on the signal never escaping and never reaching the paying customer or the public at large. It depends on the candidate who had a bad experience having no surface to warn the next one. Just the game theory stupidity of this design. You could have asked anybody in academia. TJAP is the surface. For 79 years, the candidate's experience was treated as incidental to Kelly's revenue model. It wasn't. It was load-bearing. Job seekers are the customers of the market. Job ads are the inventory. You don't filter the customers from the suppliers unless you want to collapse the U.S. economy for profit, which is what you did. Like, you filter the inventory on display. You let the users, the customers, filter the inventory on display. Employers claim to be job creators, just like farmers claim to be the people that produce apples. Just like Samsung builds electronics, they also use the money they get from the electronics sales to create the jobs that they supply to the job market. They're the suppliers of the market. They're not the customers. The inventory is the job advertisements. They're filtering the wrong thing. All of it flowed through the candidate's willingness to enter the process. Kelly built, they just did acre loss. They just did information asymmetry for profit. They collapsed the labor market for profit. The hourly building that funded the acquisition, the restructuring, the goodwill write-offs, down to the private, all of it flowed through the candidate's willingness to enter the process. Kelly built an architect. They just absolutely betrayed everyone at their lowest moment. And they did it for decades. Kelly built an architecture that extracted that willingness without instrumenting it. They profited on crushing hopes. It's just like so vomit-inducing. T-Job is the instrument that changes what that costs. Proudly, I'm excited to witness all of it. Can't change it. You can witness it. Not live in a delusion anymore. Build a map about it. The verdict, the pattern holds even here. Robert Half called candidates inventory. The architecture agreed. 32 years of filings, consistent in language and consistent in design. They never claimed to care, and they never did. The structural indifference was at least honest in its consistency. Kelly called candidates people whose lives they exist to enrich, and then Kelly built the same nothing Robert Half built. Across the actors in the series, the pattern holds. The gap between what the marketed efficient talent solutions and the profitable inefficiency is precisely what online talent vendors have always been selling and employers have always been purchasing. The gaslighting combines with the profitable inefficiency. And that systemic truth explains the job seeker experience of the talent industry skimming free labor hours, employers saving on the wages and the benefits the system doesn't require them to offer because of how desperate and demoralized it makes the workforce. And all the while feeling psychologically demoralized for the privilege. Public policy, the scope and the scale of the institutional betrayal of the entire citizenry. You just gave up like sovereignty to these companies, like economic sovereignty, your entire citizens' ability to eat. You gave it up. Just breathtaking. This is precisely what they were hired to protect against. And it's such capture, such intellectual garbage. Employers are saving on the wages and benefits. 7 business models, 7 structural inversions, each one legible from its own public archive, each one sustained by the same condition. The person with the least power has no service to speak on, no system designed to listen, and no witness willing to notice. The architecture of extraction does not require intent. It requires only the incentive structure. Have no line item for the experience of the person it cannot afford to see. This series will continue as long as it takes. The set list is long, but we take requests. Yeah. So that's Kelly Services. And I don't know which one I'll do next. These ones are longer, takes more. But yeah, I mean, just documenting the data. If the worst that I can do is document just exactly how much harm they caused and who was harmed, make it possible for people to use structural weapons to take them to court and tear them apart piece by piece. That seems reasonable. Scope and the scale of the economic harm I mentioned, eventually there'd be a Nuremberg for this behavior. The scope and the scale of the institutional betrayal, the people they've harmed, and the thing they set on fire for profit. Just so much. I think it's the problem is when people don't know what they don't know, and they don't have the capacity to learn because the system itself trained them to not look and to not see and to feel like they're going to collapse if they looked. Yeah. It's a very let them eat cake scenario. Guess you're just gonna collapse the society. That's one way. You could also just change, everybody changes. I think in the end, It's like Hamilton, this shows that if we assume the debts, the union gets a new line of credit, a financial diuretic. If we assume the trust debt, the social trust debt, the relationship gets, the market gets a new line of credit, a financial diuretic. That's what it is, a social diuretic. Until they will, they're just going to keep collapsing the market. So, and I'll just keep documenting it, because if the worst I do is document it, then that's at least something I can honor the people who have experienced it with. They deserve that. So, all right, stay sane out there. The world did make the internet made the world into a snowstorm. The way we get through this, though, is trusting the people on the road, engaging with the folks on the road. So, be safe.